His name was Marco Bellini. To the outside world, he was a businessman, a man with wealth, power, and influence that stretched from Miami to Sicily. But to those who truly knew him, he was Il Serpente, the serpent. Cold-blooded. Calculated. Deadly. He never struck without reason. Never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Because when Il Serpente decided you were a problem, there was only one way your story ended. Anthony Russo didn't believe in monsters. Maybe that's why he thought he could get away with what he did. He was young. Arrogant. Quick to anger. And when he started dating Isabella Bellini, he thought he had it all, a beautiful woman, the thrill of danger, a taste of the mafia's world. But there was one unspoken rule. One line you never, ever crossed. You don't lay a hand on the daughter of Il Serpente. There was no police report. No plea for help. Isabella never had to say a word. Because when Marco Bellini learned what happened, there was only one possible outcome. That night, Anthony stepped onto a yacht. He was laughing, drinking. He had no idea it would be the last time he'd ever see land. By morning, the yacht was found drifting miles off the Miami coast. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No body. Only a single, gold watch, found inside the stomach of a shark. What really happened on that boat? How does a man disappear so completely, leaving nothing behind but whispers? And when the most feared mafia boss in Miami is responsible, who dares to ask questions? Tonight, we uncover the brutal truth of a crime that left no witnesses, no confessions, only a silent warning of what happens when you cross Il Serpente. Miami. A city of money, power, and silence. Where the rich play by their own rules, and those who cross the wrong people disappear without a trace. For decades, Marco Bellini ruled this world. A man whose name carried weight in every corner of the city. At 57, he was more than just a mafia boss, he was the mafia boss. A man who controlled casinos, nightclubs, and an underground empire that stretched far beyond Florida's borders. A man who didn't forgive. A man who never needed to make threats, because the consequences spoke for themselves. And then, there was Anthony Russo. 24 years old. A man who wanted to be powerful, but didn't yet understand what real power meant. He called himself an entrepreneur, an up-and-coming businessman. But the truth was, he made his money through loan sharking, intimidation, and the kind of deals that ended in broken bones. He was reckless. Quick to anger. The kind of man who thought rules didn't apply to him. And that included the unspoken rule that every man in Miami knew, you don't touch Marco Bellini's family. Isabella Bellini was 22. College student. Beautiful, reserved, and raised in a world where loyalty meant everything. She had spent her whole life being protected. Kept away from the business her father ran. But Marco Bellini was no fool. He knew that danger didn't just come from rivals or the police. Sometimes, it came from the men who smiled at you, who whispered promises, who made you feel safe before showing their true nature. And Anthony Russo? He was one of those men. Their relationship had been a secret for months. The kind of secret that lived in late-night phone calls, hidden rendezvous, and whispers exchanged in the backrooms of Miami's most exclusive clubs. To outsiders, Anthony was charming. Confident. He played the role of the devoted boyfriend well. But behind closed doors, things were different. It started with whispers. Regulars at La Notte, a private nightclub owned by the Bellini family, noticed Isabella acting differently that night. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't speaking much. And when she lifted her arm to brush back her hair, someone saw it, dark bruises along her wrist. She had come in alone. But an hour later, Anthony arrived. Witnesses remember the tension. The way Isabella flinched when he grabbed her arm. The way their voices grew sharper. Louder. And then, the moment that would seal his fate. A slap. Not in a dark alley. Not behind closed doors. Right there, in the middle of the VIP section, under the dim glow of gold chandeliers and flashing cameras. And someone saw. No, everyone saw. Security was on him in seconds. Anthony was dragged outside before things could escalate. But it was already too late. Someone had already made a call. To Marco Bellini. The moment Marco heard his daughter had been touched, Anthony Russo's fate was sealed. And the next night, he would step onto a yacht, and never step off. Anthony had a history of domestic violence, but no one dared to confront him, until Isabella's father found out. Marco Bellini was known for handling problems his way. He'd lost friends to betrayals before, and nothing mattered more than family honor. When a man disappears in Miami, it's usually just another name on a growing list of unsolved cases. A city like this, built on money, vice, and silence, doesn't ask too many questions. But Anthony Russo's disappearance? That was different. He was young, connected, and reckless enough to make enemies in all the wrong places. So when his yacht was found adrift, empty, miles from shore, the authorities knew one thing: someone wanted him gone. The yacht told a story. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. No gunshot residue. No broken glass. It was as if Anthony had simply vanished into thin air. But there were clues. A half-finished drink left on the deck. A single gold chain, his, snapped and lying near the railing. And something else. Something that made this case impossible to ignore. Blood. Just a few drops, smeared along the white leather seats. Not enough to suggest a murder, but enough to raise questions. Where was Anthony Russo? And if he hadn't fallen overboard by accident, who had been on that yacht with him? The first suspect, who had a reason to kill Anthony Russo? Detectives followed the trail. Anthony was last seen at La Notte, the club owned by the Bellini family. Witnesses described the fight. The bruises on Isabella Bellini's wrist. The slap. And then, something else. The phone call. Multiple sources confirmed that after Isabella left, a call was made. A short one. To one man. Marco Bellini. Within an hour, Anthony Russo was seen leaving his condo, escorted by two men. He wasn't in handcuffs. He wasn't fighting. He was laughing. He thought it was just a business meeting. Then came the footage. Security cameras near the marina caught Anthony stepping onto a luxury yacht around midnight. He wasn't alone. The figures were blurry, shadows under the dim dock lights. But those who knew the Miami underworld didn't need clear images. They recognized the shape of a man who didn't like being recorded. Marco Bellini's right-hand enforcer. The story was coming together. A public fight. A mafia princess with bruises. A father known for making problems disappear. And then, the final clue. Days after Anthony Russo vanished, a fisherman off the coast of Miami reeled in something unexpected. A shark. Nothing unusual, until they cut it open. Inside its stomach, tangled in a mess of bones and seawater, was a gold watch. Anthony Russo's. It wasn't enough to charge Marco Bellini with murder. There was no body. No weapon. No witnesses willing to speak. But everyone knew. Marco Bellini, the man they called Il Serpente, wasn't just a suspect. He was the only suspect. But in the world of the mafia, knowing the truth and proving it, those are two very different things. Isabella's friend, she was terrified of him. She wanted out. Anthony's brother, Anthony wouldn't have just disappeared. Something happened that night. A bartender, Marco, made a call. He said something about a boat ride he won't come back from. A luxury yacht owned by Marco Bellini was docked offshore the night Anthony vanished. A deckhand anonymously tips the police. I heard screaming, then a splash. And just silence. A recovered voicemail from Anthony, left just before midnight. IF** get up. I think they know. If anything happens to me, tell my mom I love her. A diver, hired for maintenance, discovers something disturbing, a Rolex watch, Anthony's, found inside a shark's stomach. The FBI gathers enough circumstantial evidence to bring Marco in. The Bellini family refuses to cooperate. Even Isabella remains silent. Without a body, the case becomes difficult to prosecute. The case remains one of Miami's most chilling unsolved mafia disappearances. Marco Bellini was no stranger to investigations. Over the years, detectives had tried, again and again, to bring him down. Witnesses went missing. Evidence vanished. Cases collapsed. But this time, there was a difference. Anthony Russo wasn't just some rival. He wasn't a business partner who got greedy or a dealer who skimmed too much. He was a man who had touched Marco Bellini's daughter. And no amount of intimidation, bribery, or silence could erase that fact. Detectives had a theory. A motive. Even a suspect. What they didn't have, was a body. Without one, proving murder was nearly impossible. The FBI got involved, pushing Miami police to take the case seriously. They searched the waters near where Anthony's yacht was found. Divers recovered shredded pieces of clothing, a shoe, and more blood. But the ocean had already done what Marco Bellini needed it to do. It had erased the final proof. And Marco? He remained silent. When questioned, he smirked, shrugged, said he didn't know anything. No body, no crime. The FBI had seen this before. They knew they couldn't take down a man like Marco Bellini with just theories and whispers. So they did what law enforcement always does when they can't prove the crime, they found another way. A grand jury indicted Marco Bellini. Not for murder. For racketeering. Money laundering. Tax evasion. They built a case on decades of hidden deals, offshore accounts, and financial crimes. If they couldn't prove he fed Anthony Russo to a shark, they'd make sure he never walked free again. Because for years, law enforcement had tried to bring down Marco Bellini, Il Serpente, the most feared name in organized crime. They had wiretaps, whispers, even bodies. But never enough proof to make an arrest stick. Until now. Inside, the party screeches to a halt. Marco Bellini barely glances up from his seat at the head of the table. He doesn't flinch when the FBI storms in. He doesn't speak when they grab his arms and force him up. He simply exhales a stream of cigar smoke and mutters two words. Took you long enough. Without a body, prosecutors couldn't charge Marco Bellini with murder. But they didn't need a corpse to put him away. They had a different plan. The indictment was stacked with charges. Racketeering, a decades-long empire built on fear and blood money. Money laundering, millions funneled through fake businesses and offshore accounts. Tax evasion, the same crime that once brought down Al Capone. Obstruction of justice, witnesses vanished. Evidence disappeared. The mafia's silent code at work. And finally, the charge that tied it all together. Conspiracy to commit murder. Because while prosecutors couldn't prove Marco had thrown Anthony Russo into the ocean, they could prove one thing. He had ordered it. And in the eyes of the law, that was enough. The booking, the end of an era. One journalist calls out. Marco. Is it true you fed Anthony Russo to a shark? For the first time, Marco pauses. He turns his head slightly, smirks, and says. I don't talk about fairy tales. For the first time in decades, Marco Bellini wasn't calling the shots. But in the world of organized crime, power isn't just about where you are. It's about who still fears your name. And even in handcuffs, Illinois Serpent was still the most dangerous man in Miami. Marco Bellini had been here before. For years, law enforcement had tried to bring him down. Bribery, extortion, murder. But he had never been convicted. This time, though, it wasn't just about business. This was personal. And while the court wasn't charging him with murder, everyone in that room knew the real reason he was on trial. How do you prove a murder without a body? They started with the facts. Anthony Russo was last seen alive boarding a yacht linked to Marco Bellini's men. He never left. His blood was found inside. And days later, his gold watch was discovered inside the stomach of a shark. The lead prosecutor, Jennifer Alvarez, took a step toward the jury. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. We don't need a body to know a man is dead. We just need to follow the evidence. They painted the picture. Anthony Russo wasn't a saint. He had a temper. He had enemies. But one mistake sealed his fate. He had beaten Isabella Bellini in public. And hours later, he was gone. The defense didn't need to prove Marco was innocent. They just needed to plant doubt. And doubt, in a case like this, was easy to find. Where is the proof? Ladies and gentlemen, you're being asked to convict a man based on nothing but theories. There's no body. No witnesses. Just a story. Anthony Russo had enemies. He owed money. He lived recklessly. How do we know he didn't disappear on purpose? Or that someone else didn't have a reason to make him vanish? The defense argued that the yacht footage was inconclusive. The blood? Not enough to prove a murder. And the shark? Just a coincidence. They reminded the jury of one thing. No body, no crime. The witnesses, silence and fear. Witness after witness took the stand. Bartenders. Dock workers. Associates of the Bellini family. And they all had one thing in common. They didn't remember much. Some stammered. Some glanced toward the gallery, where Marco Bellini's men sat, watching. One witness, a former Bellini enforcer, had agreed to testify. But by the time the trial started, he was gone. Found in a motel room with 2 bullets in his chest. Ruled a robbery. Everyone knew better. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the room was silent. The judge turned to the foreman. "Judge, has the jury reached a verdict?" A nod. A folded piece of paper passed to the bailiff. The judge opened it. Read it. Looked up. "Judge, on the charges of racketeering, money laundering, and tax evasion, we find the defendant guilty. No murder conviction. No justice for Anthony Russo." Because in the end, the jury couldn't convict a man for a crime they couldn't prove. Marco Bellini was sentenced to 25 years. A powerful man stripped of his empire. But not a murderer in the eyes of the law. Because some men don't need to be found guilty to remind the world who they are. And Anthony Russo? Just another ghost. Lost to the ocean. Lost to silence. Lost to Il Serpent. Unanswered questions. Was Anthony's fate sealed the moment he raised a hand against Isabella? Did Isabella know what her father planned? How many more secrets does the Miami underworld hold beneath the waves? Do you think Marco Bellini really got away with murder, or was this just another mafia myth? Should Isabella have come forward, or was she right to stay silent? Subscribe for more stories of power, crime, and the secrets that never stay buried.